Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I'm Suzanne Sherman. I will be your host for the next hour here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. I have a really special guest for you today. Today is Tuesday, June 11th, year of our Lord 2019. Joining me in our studio, Jeff Johnson, producing, co-hosting, Mike Maharrey from the 10th Amendment Center and MikeMaharrey.com. is joining me. Want to remind you before we bring him on to follow us on Facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. CRN is our fan page. Want to thank all of those that are following, that have joined us recently, as well as Suzanne Sherman's The Wasatch Report. Also, those of you that are friends with me on Facebook, I have been released for my latest incarceration, so you can send me messages and I can respond to them. I can also share them on the air. If you're listening live on YouTube, we have a live chat. So join in and you can ask Mike some questions today. You're not going to want to miss out on that opportunity. If you can't listen live, fear not. All of our episodes are uploaded to SoundCloud. Please follow us there. Subscribe on YouTube. Tell your friends. We were talking before we went on the air today. Facebook does not like the message that all of us are trying to share with you. It's really hard to get it out there. So, let's try and get around that. Put our pages first. Put C first as your option on Facebook. Set one of our pages, 10th Amendment Center, MikeMaharrey.com, SuzanneCSherman.com as your homepage. Tell your friend and share. Want to thank all the new people that have subscribed to my website, SuzanneCSherman.com. Go over there. You can see my blogs, my articles, 10th Amendment Center articles that they published of mine are all there under Suzanne's articles, surprisingly. And let's see. Also, I want to thank my friend Richard for a very generous donation to my website yesterday. We will be using that to improve our equipment here. We hope to be taking phone calls soon. It's an equipment issue, not a software or anything else issue. We're going to get that resolved thanks to our loyal listeners that are helping chip in for that. Quick announcement also, tomorrow, my good friend Justin Spears is going to be joining us to talk about his articles from FEE. Also, they were shared on the 10th Amendment Center about the need to radically decentralize education. I talk all the time. One of the reasons we are doomed if we don't educate ourselves, we have the trifecta of evil, the government, the entertainment industry, and the education industry, keeping us ignorant. People like Justin telling us how we can solve these problems is our only hope to get out from this tyrannical system under which we are living. So that's going to be a really good show. Looking forward to that. Again, thank you for those that are following, sharing, listening. We really appreciate that. Without further ado, Mike Maharrey, how are you today?
I'm doing good. Do you like the taste of freedom now that you're out of Facebook jail for a minute?
It changes a person.
I know.
I like how you said for a minute as well.
Oh, I'm just assuming.
Yeah, and for good reason. Let me tell you something. I'm getting banned not for posts that I have put or anything recently. I have confessed before. I own the crap I said from my raving, slobbering neocon days. I own that. I have cleared my page from all that garbage. But what they're finding right now are comments that are invisible to the entire world other than Facebook's computer scanning technology, trying to find an excuse to silence our voice here. Because when my page is quiet, we can't really get our pages out. So these are things that are 7 or 8 years old. Ironically, the stuff that I am saying now is trying to solve the problems that I was ranting and raving about before. They love when we go and scream about Obama or Hillary or the other party, and when the sides fight against each other. I just saw a video on Facebook the other day. It was 2 antelope engaged in a headlock, fighting. All of a sudden, the other antelope are watching and they run off, and these two are fighting and just focused on each other. And out from the middle of nowhere comes a lion and grabs one of them. They want us wasting our time with these battles that in the long run don't mean anything. But when you start having a message that is significant and cuts to the core of what the problem really is, they're gonna shut you down. That
Yep.
being said, Mike, tell us about yourself and what you're doing.
Oh gosh. Um, where do you start? There's so much. I'm the National Communications Director of the 10th Amendment Center. That's probably I guess, my main gig. And so we are working towards that radical decentralization that Justin's working towards in education. We're looking for that in a political sense, devolving power away from Washington, D.C., back towards the states, towards local governments, ultimately to the individual. And so we do education on the Constitution, which most people know nothing about and nobody follows. And then we also do political activism, and the main focus of that is using state and local power to undermine federal overreach. And it's not that we think state governments are great or local governments are wonderful, because obviously they're not. All government sucks. But when you decentralize the system, then you have more options and you have some competition, and ultimately you have the opportunity to leave a particularly oppressive jurisdiction. I am a firm believer that the gravest threat to our liberties is the centralization and concentration of power into single places and in the hands of a few people. So that's the essence of the work at the 10th Amendment Center. We look for ways to undermine that federal overreach. And then I've got my fingers in all kinds of other things as well. I've got my own website, michaelmaharrey.com. I do a podcast. I run a website called Godarchy, which is a site that's focused on Christianity and basically voluntarism, unpolitics, I like to call it. And then I'm also involved in a lawsuit here in my hometown of Lexington, Kentucky, with the city, basically over open records request. And I guess we'll get into that here a little bit in just a second. But I've been involved in surveillance issues for quite a while and came to discover that we have our own budding surveillance state right here in my own city. So I had to get involved with that. And we have a little organization here, a grassroots group of people that are pushing towards oversight and accountability. And that's over police surveillance technology. So I'm pretty busy.
Well, with regard to, we're going to get into that Lexington issue. And by the way, in response to Lexington City's shenanigans, Salt Lake City in Utah says, "Hold my beer,"
Yeah, right?
or hold my water, or whatever it is we're allowed to drink out here. So we're going to talk about that as well. And so essentially, we're going to cover today is an update. We're going to give a history for those that aren't familiar with your lawsuit involving Lexington, and a marijuana activist that has been arrested. You sent an email out the other day that said this battle has gotten personal. By the way, subscribe to Mike Maharrey's email and you will get updates on what's going on. Geowarrants, that's something I bet people haven't heard about. And then we're going to, again, talk about what's going on here in Utah. And as we said before the show, that we're probably going to use the whole hour and go off track multiple times. And I'm going to start right now. When you talk about your work with the 10th Amendment Center, I was thinking about our chats, over the time that I've known you, and having you come on the air today. I was going to ask you, what part of the Constitution do you think is the most understood? And if somebody had asked me that question, I don't think I could pick a single one. We're only talking 7 articles, 7, that's it. And then the amendments. It's not supposed to be that hard. I don't think it was intended to be that complicated, yet people don't really understand. My take is any of it. What say you?
Yeah, I agree with you. I've just finished up the first draft on a book that I hope to have out, God willing. I'd like to get it done in the next 6 to 8 weeks, but we'll see how that goes. My original goal was to have it out in May of 2018. So, we'll see how it goes. But it's kind of a Constitution 101 kind of thing. And I go through all of the various clauses and uh, things like executive power, and I talk about nullification and all of these basic constitutional principles. And as I was writing the introduction to that book, one of the things that kind of popped out was the fact that we have created this interpretation of the Constitution. And really, what we need to do is uninterpret it, because all of the interpretation is wrong. And that's really where everybody's confused. We've had politicians and those that support them. So, academics, lawyers, professors, all of these people who support the political class, they have rewritten all of these very simple provisions and bastardized these principles to the point that I was sitting here trying to think when you were saying that. Well, maybe they don't understand that. Well, maybe no, don't understand that. Even the most basic things like we the people, nobody really understands what that actually means. So, yeah, it's a pretty sad state of affairs when you consider that supposedly the Constitution is the law of the land, the supreme law of the land. Well, nobody knows what in the hell it means. And basically, we're at the point now that the powers of government are defined and dictated by the government. And, that's certainly not going to end well for you and me, right?
And
Hey,
interesting.
Suzanne.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in here? Because I'm going to bring my dude into this. Patrick Henry said, who gave them the power to say, to talk for we the people and not we the states? That was just my one little interjection there. But I have a question. Wouldn't you say that probably one of the most misunderstood things about the Constitution is this whole notion of balance of powers? Because Article 1, Section 8 pretty much puts every power in the legislative branch. The president has pretty much one power, the veto power, and the courts are the absolute weakest part of the link, but they wield the most power today. Is that pretty much on spot there, Mike?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The Congress was intended to hold the most power because it was considered to be the branch of government that is closest to the people. They're elected most frequently. They're from your local community. Theoretically, you could know your representative and even your senator. And the president was merely supposed to execute the laws. They were very careful and very emphatic about the fact that they didn't want a single individual to hold all of the power as the King of England did. And as you said, the courts, it was even stated during the ratification debates that the judiciary would be the weakest of all the branches. And what has happened, I think, is Congress has effectively usurped its responsibility and passed its responsibility off to mostly the president. So now Congress can sit and complain, well, the president is doing this and the president's doing, well, don't let them, And then, of course, the courts have used the 14th Amendment and the incorporation doctrine to basically take unto themselves a large field of power. And, when I think of balance of powers, I think where the real balance of power was supposed to be was between the states and the federal government. The states were supposed to wield the authority, and the states were supposed to serve as the check on federal authority. And again, the states haven't done their job. Now, when the states do their jobs, they have tremendous power to stop federal overreach. And we can look at, I think the best example is the legalization of marijuana in all of these states while the federal government still maintains prohibition. We could use that template on all kinds of issues, but unfortunately states have become beholden to the federal government, and instead of serving as a check on federal power, they have basically fed at the trough of federal power and given up their sovereignty in exchange for some federal funding. So that's the state we're in.
When you talk states, no pun intended. When you talk about that the Constitution has essentially been rewritten or reinterpreted, isn't it interesting how all education from the main sources, again, folks, this is why you need to listen to people like Mike Maharrey, listen to our network, follow the 10th Amendment Center. I submit to you, if you spend a couple days reading the articles and what the 10th Amendment has to say on the Constitution, you will understand the document and its intent than any judge sitting on the federal judiciary.
Absolutely.
Anywhere. This rewritten or this reinterpretation of the Constitution all coincidentally and conveniently has been framed to indoctrinate people into accepting all power comes from Washington, D.C. When people complain, oh, about the government, they always say the government. It gives us the impression that there is only one government, Washington, D.C., and the states are just kind of there for certain people. When we also talk about the checks of the power in this government, well, when we go to school, I talk about this all the time. We had our little triangle. We have the
Mhm.
branches of government and the little arrows going back and forth. And I was so into this stuff. I got my colored pencils out, man. Mine was fancy, but nowhere did they ever include the states in
That's
this.
right.
Ultimate vanguard of our liberty is completely ignored. So when I try to come up with one aspect of the Constitution that everybody gets, I got nothing. I
Yeah.
got nothing for you. So again, folks, follow the 10th Amendment Center. I've got a bunch of articles on there. And Mike also has a book. It's an ebook you can get for free, which is a shortened version of a hard copy book. You can get The Power of No. Just tell people how to get that. And then we're going to move on to your Lexington suit.
Yeah, all you got to do is go to my website, michaelmaharrey.com. And as soon as you get to that homepage, you're going to get a pop-up and it will just, all you got to do is give me your email address. You give me your email address, I give you a free ebook. How great is that? And then you'll also be on my email list, which you'll get my Monday musings. Really, that's all I send out. I don't send out a bunch of spam. So,
No, also, you mentioned the 14th Amendment. That's been the springboard from which I've said the federal judiciary has completely and systematically dismantled our federal republic. If you want a quick and easy read on that, go to our good friend Dave Benner's book,
Yep.
The 14th Amendment and the Incorporation Doctrine. It is about 40 pages long. And again, you will know more than any sitting Supreme Court judge or any constitutional expert out there. Go to SuzanneCSherman.com. There's an Amazon affiliate link. Doesn't cost you any more to order it through there, and it will help us out. Tell us about Lexington. You've been involved in some shenanigans out there, Mike, questioning the good intentions of the boys in blue out there. What's up with that?
Can you believe that? I mean, how could anybody not trust our fine, upstanding law enforcement community? Mainly because they keep secrets from us and sue you when you try to find out stuff. So I'll try to give the short version, which it's hard to do now because this is actually now going on 2 years. Can you believe that?
That's crazy.
Yeah, so it was almost exactly 2 years ago that the city of Lexington put up some cameras, surveillance cameras, in a skateboard park that's actually in my neighborhood. And having done quite a bit of work in the surveillance sphere over the last several years with the 10th Amendment Center, when I saw those cameras, it immediately sent up red flags. When you start seeing surveillance, that usually indicates that it is the tip of the iceberg.
I can't believe you don't want to keep the good citizens of Kentucky safe from skateboarders. What?
Well,
What?
I know, and they're such little hooligans with their little wheels and weird hair and t-shirts. It's just so I started doing a little bit of digging and did an open records request to the Lexington Police Department, trying to find out what other surveillance technologies that they are using. And as it turns out, the police department has what they describe as 29 mobile surveillance cameras. And these are covert things, okay? So this is separate and distinct from the cameras that are still in the park. So you're probably wondering, well, what in the world is a mobile surveillance camera? Well, that is the $64,000 question that everybody is wondering, because by golly, the Lexington Police Department does not want us to know. So they basically refused to give me any information. They gave me some financial data, like how much they cost, but everything else was redacted. So yeah, it was. I've got 400 pages with black bars all over them. So I appealed to the Kentucky State Attorney General, which is the process for an open records appeal. And they looked at my request, and they looked at the denial and the reasons that the police department chose to deny the records. And they ruled in my favor and said, Lexington Police Department, you need to give Mike these records. The exemptions that you're claiming don't fit. Instead of giving me the documents, they served me with a lawsuit. So, and people go, well, how could they do that? Because the open records law in Kentucky is stupid. And that's actually the process. If you disagree with the attorney general, then you have to sue the other party.
Okay, let me interject really quick, because what I see here is something that I can't even give them a good faith benefit of the doubt here, because all I can assume is this is a draconian effort to have a chilling effect on having the temerity of questioning the intentions of law enforcement. Because consider the resources of a private individual if you follow through with this and don't take the pat on the back and say, okay, pat on the head, be on your merry way. We gave you what you're going to get. That's all. Because if you pursue this, you get slapped with a lawsuit. Now, you as an individual, unless, and we're going to get into this, somebody comes along to assist you legally, and then compare your resources to that of the government.
Yep, you hit the nail on the head. And here's the telltale sign. And this is the thing that kind of freaked my wife out when we actually got the papers. So, we're sitting watching TV. We get the bang on the door. It's like 8 o'clock in the evening. There's the constable. You're being served, sign the papers, go in and start reading it. And I'm like, oh, I'm getting sued by the city. And, my wife's a little bit disturbed. And as I'm reading through there, at the end of the lawsuit, the city of Lexington asks that the court make me pay the city's court costs.
Now, think of with their taxes.
Wrap your head around this for a second. Here I am, a citizen of this city. I hate the term citizen, but it kind of fits here, citizen. I'm a taxpayer in this city. They're going to sue me and then make me pay for them to sue me when I'm already paying them to exist in the first place. And it's, on a little side note, you hear people say, well, Mike, we are the government. Well, if we are the government, why the hell am I suing myself? That's dumb. So anyway, yeah, it was clearly intended to, okay, little man, go away. And the ironic part of it is that under open records law, they're not even allowed to ask for court costs. So, I mean, they just threw that in there as an intimidation factor. There was no way they were ever going to get court costs from me. But as you kind of alluded to, fortunately for me.
Really quick, what if you don't know what you know and you're just an average citizen that goes and asks? They are going to be shut down so fast.
Oh, absolutely. The average citizen would have gotten those papers and immediately dropped the matter, because how much money does it cost to fight a lawsuit, and time? I mean, as I said, I got served in October of 2017. So, we're now a year and a half into the lawsuit. Nobody has that kind of time, and certainly nobody has the money to pay lawyers to march this thing through the system. And as you will find out here in a second, the process that you have to go through is extensive. It's not just that you go to court one time. This would have cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend, and there's no way that a private individual, unless they were of means, and I'm certainly not, would have been able to pursue this without help.
Who's helping you?
The ACLU, believe it or not.
This is why I don't like to paint with a broad brush. As much as people complain about the ACLU, if it weren't for them, you would be stuck here. And imagine now, what if even unlawfully, and you weren't represented by the ACLU, the court did award the city court costs and attorney's fees?
Right.
You would be ruined for life for having done nothing other than rightfully questioning the goings on of the police officers here and the police department's cameras, and then being sued over it after you didn't get the information.
Yep.
So people can follow Mike and see what's going on. Keep us updated. You just went to go testify about this, didn't you?
Yeah, I didn't actually have to testify. So just kind of to give people an overview of where we are in the process. Like I said, the Attorney General ruled in my favor, and that was the point that the city sued. We then went to circuit court, and in the circuit court, the judge ruled in my favor and told the city to give up the documents. So the city did basically a reconsideration. So went back to the circuit court, back to the same judge on some technical terms. He once again ruled in my favor. So we're now 3 rulings in Mike's favor. But the city was not done yet. So then they appealed to the Kentucky State Court of Appeals. And that's where I was just last week. We had oral arguments before the Kentucky State Court of Appeals. And then so we will see where it goes next. They could rule in my favor. And at that point, I would fully expect the city will probably take it to the state Supreme Court. The other thing that could happen is they could remand it back to the circuit court for some reconsideration on some technical legal things. So we'll see what happens.
I got an email from you the other day, and that was one of the reasons I rattled your cage and have you on the show, because it really resonated with me, because you talk about most of the time we're fighting for an abstraction. You look for things like liberty and freedom. We talk about this limited government. We believe in these concepts, but most of the time they're concepts, and people don't really want to get into this fray because it doesn't really feel like we're living under soft tyranny. We're going to get into something that happened to a friend of yours, Ethan Tampy. But first, let me ask you about the general outpouring of gratitude you must be getting from the people in your community in Lexington.
Yeah, that's not happening, really. For the most part, when it comes to surveillance, most people are like, eh. I mean, there are certain people, certainly, that are who understand, who value their own right to privacy, who have a healthy skepticism of government, especially when it's trying to operate in secret. But there are an awful lot of people who have the mentality of, well, I don't have anything to hide. Let them. They're trying to protect me. They should have cameras everywhere. And why should we question? There is a, to use the harsh term, there are a lot of bootlickers out there.
Yes.
And I'd say if you were to just grab the average person, the average group of people in Lexington, I think it would probably be about a 50-50 split. If that, I think it would even maybe lean towards I have nothing to hide. So yeah, I'm not seeing the outpouring of appreciation, although the people that do appreciate have certainly been vocal, and I'm thankful for their support. But by and large, it's really apathy. And sadly, that's really the world we live in. I think most people just don't give a damn about much of anything, really.
Yeah, until it happens to you. And then
exactly.
It's too late. And like you say to the people that will claim, well, if you've got nothing to hide, you shouldn't worry. And I like your response. Well, then how about you submit and make public your
nobody's
searches for the past year?
Nobody's done that yet. I've made this offer numerous times, and nobody has ever sent it. I'll make it here. If anybody out there is thinking, well, if I don't have anything to hide, send me your email browsing history for the last year. You can easily obtain that. Don't redact anything. Don't take anything out. Email it to me. I'll post it on my website,
and we'll have you on the show. So first one, step on up.
There you go.
Well, in your email also, you were talking about how they're getting personal. And let's talk a little bit about Ethan Tampy.
Yeah. So this was just last week. I was wasting time on Facebook, which I guess a lot of people do. And this article popped up in my Facebook feed about Ethan Tampy. He's not a close friend, but somebody that I've worked with on numerous occasions over the past 7 or 8 years. He's a marijuana activist in Missouri, and he was indicted on federal marijuana charges just last week, basically conspiracy to import weed into the state of Missouri. Now, here's the thing that blew my mind.
My quick caveat, can we cite the constitutional authority for the Controlled Substances Act?
That's it right there. There certainly isn't any.
By the way,
crickets. There were crickets.
Yeah. And there are many articles about that on the 10th Amendment Center, including one that I wrote, Parchment to Plants.
Yep.
What the Prohibition era can teach us about the drug wars. I encourage you can go to either 10th Amendment Center, or it's easier actually to find on SuzanneCSherman.com. I collected all of those and put them in one place. Don't hesitate to go over to the 10th Amendment Center and read their stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, so here's the thing that boggles my mind. He could face, just on one of these charges, from 10 years to life in prison. Think about that. Life in prison for a plant. Now, he's never hurt anybody. He's not beaten anybody up. He's not killed anybody. And we see murderers serve far less time than life in prison. It's just no matter what you might think about marijuana, and some people are going to say, well, he broke the law. Okay, I get it, whatever. It's an unconstitutional and unjust law. But even setting aside that, just the proportion of justice, when you look at the amount of penalty associated with some of these marijuana laws, is absolutely absurd. But the thing that really struck me is this is a person that I know. We've talked on the phone. Mostly it's been business oriented, but we've chatted about things. He's a nice guy from everything that I can, every interaction I've ever had with him. Just a normal person, just like all of us, who faces completely ruining his life because of a law against a plant that an awful lot of people want access to. We have 33 states now that have legalized marijuana for medical use, even states like Utah to some degree. And yet we're still dealing with this mentality. Well, we got to lock these people in cages. And that's what I mean when it gets personal, because, you see these stories about people who have cancer and they're using marijuana and they end up getting arrested. Or, there was one not too long ago about a lady that was in Texas. I think she was flying out of one of the airports there in Texas, and she had some CBD oil that had small amounts of THC in it. Not even the amount of THC that would make it illegal. It was still hemp derived. And yet there was a little bit of THC, and some drug dog apparently sniffed it out. They arrested her because in Texas, there was like a zero tolerance for THC. This is some little old grandma who's taking THC for arthritis. Well, I take THC for arthritis. So that means that potentially, if I happen to be at the wrong place, I could end up in jail. And to see this happen to somebody that I know personally, it really hit home that all of this activism, all of this political stuff, it's really not just about abstract principles. It is about individuals and people who are having their lives run over by bureaucrats and politicians who are exercising authority they should never rightly exercise. Let's not even talk about the Constitution. Let's just talk about self-ownership. If you own yourself, and I think most people at some level believe that they own themselves, if that is true, how the hell can some damn bureaucrat somewhere come running along and say, well, you can't have this plant because I don't like it? It's absurd, and it needs to be fought. And I guess, if nothing else, that'll keep me going when you see your friends potentially locked in a cage. And it's not just marijuana. Have the wrong kind of firearm, or, oh my God, you have a bump stock, or, the federal government told me I'd get to keep my doctors with Obamacare. Well, that was bullshit. Excuse me. But so, yeah, it obviously it makes me angry when I start swearing, that I'm mad.
Well, no worries. You should hear me when I'm out doing yard work. Hey, the thing is too, and this is what I tried to warn people about with regards to medical marijuana cards. And this is why I am vehemently against medical marijuana, because you have to go and seek permission from your care provider. Well, some of us don't like to go to care providers, and some of us also recognize the inherent threat of the requirement that all of our medical records now be saved electronically. Then, if you also have sought permission from the Crown to carry a concealed firearm, in some states you have to get permission like we do in Utah. Don't think for a nanosecond that a cross-check or cross-reference is not possible. As we know, the federal government has said, fine, you can have your weed, but you can't have your guns at the same time. You can have one or the other, but not both. So if you are seeking medical assistance and pain other than from opiates, muscle relaxers, or things like that, and you're using it for, I don't know, arthritis or cancer, whatever the case may be, because we say so, you will be rendered less capable of protecting yourself and your family.
Yep.
You have a choice. You can live in pain or you can defend yourself, but not both, because if you try to do both, we will put you in a cage. And the states are tolerating this. Mike, you let me publish an article at 10th Amendment Center, again, saying that the states need to step up and put an end to this and tell the feds, you know what? You try and arrest somebody in my state, in our sovereign state, we will arrest you. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, feds. But they
Hey.
aren't saying that. Put that in your pipe. See what I did there?
Yeah, I like that. That was good.
But they're not doing that. And, we had a political prisoner out here. His name's Bill Keebler. You talk about friends that you've talked to. He was somebody that was teaching people homesteading techniques out in the town of Stockton. He was also at the Bundy Ranch.
Oh, shame on him.
Oh, yeah. And after he got back, he was terrified. Absolutely terrified. We talked on the phone. He said, they're coming for me. They are coming to get me. And he was taken into custody. He was accused of attempting to set off a pipe bomb outside of a BLM office in Salt Lake City. Who do you think his cohort was? An FBI confidential informant.
Of course.
When I spoke to Bill Keebler, I asked him, what was it like there? He said it was terrifying. They had the laser pointers on their, from their snipers. They were on us constantly, guns pointed at us from every direction. Bill, let me ask you a question. At any time, did anybody there ever point a firearm at the government agents on the scene? Absolutely not, he said. Well, what do you think happened? He could have been available to testify to this effect had he not been incarcerated, correct? Well, he eventually got a deal. They said, look, if you plea out, and you've got 10 minutes to think about this, by the way, given
Right.
your horrible health condition. I think, was in a wheelchair at the time. His health deteriorated so badly. And I met this guy. He had an event out here in West Valley, Utah, with Sheriff Mack from Constitutional Sheriffs Association. And, Bill was not a renegade. He was not a terrorist, but they said either you cop a plea to this or it's going to go very badly for you. If you cop a plea, we'll release you. He copped a plea. They released him. Let me ask you this, Mike, Jeff, you can weigh in as well. If somebody is so dangerous that they're going to set off a bomb in a populated area like Salt Lake City, do you think they should be released from prison?
Well, you would think they wouldn't do that, right?
Right? So it kind of raises the issue that maybe the charges were bogus and this guy was really a political.
Well, and how many times have we seen? I mean, it's these confidential informants, and FBI undercover people. There are numerous documented cases where essentially the FBI has created the very scheme that they're arresting somebody for. So yeah, I don't trust him as far as I can throw him.
No, not at all. Just real going back, this is about 10 years or so. This made the news everywhere where there were white Christian extremist militants that were plotting to set off bombs at police officers' funerals, made the news. Confidential informants involved, all charges dismissed. That never made the news. As Karl Rove said, you cannot unring the bell when you set off this sort of a public sentiment outcry. Let's move on to really quick. You had a fantastic article about Geowarrants, and then we'll wrap up the show with Utah's version on steroids of what what Lexington, Kentucky's doing. Let's talk about your article on Geowarrants. And as I said to you before the show, did you ever think we would consider the days of writs of assistance the good old days?
Yeah, it is interesting. You look back and I don't think most people probably even know what a writ of assistance is or was. It was one of the first flashpoints between colonists and the British prior to the American Revolution. And sometimes they're called general warrants. And basically what they were warrants that allowed customs officials to enter into pretty much any premises and search for pretty much whatever they want. So thus the term general warrant. It authorized them to search any place for anything. And this was a huge conflict between colonists and the British Crown long before things really started to ratchet up with things like the Stamp Act and in the various parliamentary edicts that ended up pushing the Americans toward revolution. And these general warrants are the reason that we have a Fourth Amendment. It was concern that the new government would come up with some type of scheme like this. And so they insisted that if government agents are going to search a premises, that they must have a warrant. It must have probable cause. It must be specific. You have to it has to determine what's being searched for or who's being searched. All of these things are supposed to be specific. Well, as with everything else in the Constitution, the government has reinterpreted this. They've reinterpreted what is reasonable to be basically whatever the police departments want, and we can't even trust these judges to protect us. And it was interesting. It's about a year ago when I was having a discussion about the surveillance in Lexington, and this cop got on my Facebook site for We See You Watching Lexington. He was like, "Well, the judges will protect you. There's well-defined laws, and you can, you're just over the top here because the judges." No, the judges aren't going to protect you. And these things called geofence warrants are a perfect indication of just how far judges have strayed from this specificity. So what is a geofence warrant? Basically, what happens is a police officer or a bunch of police officers will get together, and let's say there's a crime on a certain street. So they'll get a map and they'll draw a big line. They'll use the crime scene as the point in the middle, and they'll draw this huge line between it. And they'll go to a company like Google or a electronic service provider, maybe Verizon or AT&T, and they'll go to them and they'll get a warrant to get the location data for every electronic device that passed through that area during a given time. So if you just happen to walk maybe a mile away from a crime scene at the wrong time with your phone or your other electronic device, you have suddenly become a suspect. And they get all of this information and then use it for a giant, basically a giant hunt, and this is absolutely contrary to the specificity that is supposed to be in a warrant. And yet here we are, we've got judges that are granting these warrants and allowing police to have these, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a word I'm trying to find that I can't get out of the top of my head.
It sounds like they're substituting technology for probable cause.
Well, absolutely.
So,
And so, yeah, I mean, just think about that for a minute. They're getting hundreds and hundreds of people caught up in these dragnets. And like I said, all of a sudden you're a suspect. And the New York Times article that revealed all of this stuff talked about this poor guy in Arizona who was actually arrested and held on a murder charge for a while because he happened to be in the area, happened to get caught up in the dragnet, and there was some, coincidental evidence that made it look like he might be the guy. And eventually they, thank goodness for him, figured out that no, this wasn't the guy. But how quickly these general warrants can turn into innocent people being locked in cages for no reason. I don't even know, what do you do about this? We have the warrants, we have the Fourth Amendment, we have the law, the judges are supposed to protect us, and yet once again we have the government siding with the government, which shock.
What a surprise. Interestingly, when we talk about the Fourth Amendment, it's pretty darn clear. It again wasn't written to be confusing. This was written so the average voter could understand what the limitations of the general government was supposed to be. But let me revert back to my time in law school. We're learning about the Fourth Amendment. And again, we are not taught in law school. Again, go to my website, SuzanneCSherman.com, read my article, The Problem with Lawyers and the Constitution. We are taught case law. The ratification debates are never raised. The preamble to the Bill of Rights. Yes, that's right. There are two of them.
There is one.
Never heard that about my undergrad years at UCLA or in law school, but we're taught case law. So when you're taught case law now, so you can prepare to take your good little bar exam, you are taught in bar review an acronym that is a mile long for exceptions to the warrant requirement.
Right.
And there are so many of them. Again, you memorize this acronym when you sit down to take your test. and you see a criminal law fact pattern, you write them all down, and that way you can go through that check pattern, and there are like 15 or 20 of them. It pretty much renders the Fourth Amendment toothless. So that's important, and people really accept also, because this is coming through technology, this asinine third party doctrine, where essentially any communication, because it may go through a third party doctrine, now you no longer have what they call a reasonable expectation of privacy, which has become, again, an exception to the warrant requirement. If you have no reasonable expectation of privacy with regards to a certain issue or event or matter, well, forget it then, that you don't have these protections. And that's the problem. Try and communicate. Mike, have we ever communicated absent a third party?
No.
No, you cannot do it unless you're maybe in a skateboard park in Lexington. Oh, no, wait.
Right. Right. Well, then you're in public, so you have no expectation of privacy. Yeah, it's insane. And like I said, like you've said, they've expanded this to the point that it is utterly meaningless, and so the government can basically use it to uh, for whatever ends that they want to use it for. And the technology aspect of it makes it even more insidious, I think. If some guy came into your house and pulled papers out of your filing cabinet, you would be outraged. But if somebody uses a machine and plucks an email out of the air, that doesn't seem to bother people. It's like, I guess it's out of sight, out of mind kind of things. But the invasiveness of technology today is just, I mean, I shudder to even think what somebody like James Otis Jr. would have thought. He was the guy that fought the writs of assistance for the colonists. I mean, imagine what he would think today if he could see the stingray devices and license plate readers and, things that can see under your clothing if you're carrying a concealed weapon, or just all of these things. It's like, geez Louise. Now, good news, we are starting to see at least some states requiring warrants for third-party access to third-party data. So that's good, except for the fact that, as we've just seen, the warrant requirement seems to be meaningless because, well, we'll grant a warrant for anything. So,
Right. Well, you did mention something that is relevant to Utah.
I did that on purpose.
I
That's called a segue.
And rather than just going with it, I had to just totally botch it.
Oh, this was way more fun.
It
See,
did-
now people have an inside look at how radio works.
Right. Here's the
We're
story.
professionals. Don't try this at home.
Like I mentioned earlier, Utah's response to Lexington, Kentucky is hold my root beer. Police are using TSA-style scanners to spy on people in public places. So Utah is a shall-issue state. If you are a law-abiding citizen, whatever that means, and you qualify to own a firearm and you request permission from the Crown, you can get a permission slip to conceal carry.
Mhm.
Well, there is an organization called, get this, Liberty Defense, who considers you, if you go to their website, they consider you on a par with terrorists. They want the public to know, they want government officials to know when concealed carry weapons holders and terrorists are in the area. Mind you, they put us all together. So those of us that have made it incumbent upon ourselves to be personally responsible for our own security and protection, because as we know, the Black Robe Messiahs had said the police officers are under no obligation to do so. They still want to know where we are. And this was an article that came out of the Activist Post, and they were referring to a piece that came from the Salt Lake Tribune. So you can find it in either one of those, but these are TSA-style body scanners are coming to public places, and the Utah Attorney General and law enforcement have taken this as a unilateral action upon themselves. Nobody voted for this. I called Governor Herbert's office a couple days ago. Surprise, surprise. No call back.
Oh, I'm shocked.
I know. So soon, they say here, no one is going to be safe from Big Brother's prying eyes. This is called Hexwave. The company that's putting this out is called, get this, Liberty Defense. You can find them on Facebook, and the only comments when I checked the other day were accolades. Oh, thank you for keeping us safe. It is.
Well, yeah, I'm sure they delete the other ones.
Yes, they do. Bootlicker Central. So
Mhm.
here we go, where again, these are hidden. You don't know where they're going to be. It shows here that you're walking in places, but I submit to you, when this actually rolls out, you're not going to know. Fear not, they say. No taxpayer funds are being used to implement this. Doesn't that make you feel better about the whole thing?
Well, that tells me that there's probably federal grant money in there. And I think it was in that article. It might have been in something else I read. There's some speculation that this Liberty, whatever they're called, is a DoD front company, so Department of Defense. And that's the reality with so much of this surveillance technology. We have evolved into a federal surveillance state that the federal government is using state and local law enforcement to expand its surveillance state. So what it does is it funds this stuff. It creates these front companies. All of these companies, these private surveillance companies, are former, I'm using air quotes, government officials that have been in the NSA or the CIA or Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security. They create these companies. They work with the federal government. They get federal funding. They get this stuff to the state and local law enforcement with no taxpayer dollars. So, nobody throws a fit about the cost. And then they create these surveillance dragnets. And, all of this data gets stored. It's not just that they're going to know that Suzanne Sherman walked through a given area with a concealed handgun. That's going to get stored in some database somewhere forever. And they build these data points, and pretty soon they're going to be able to track you all over the place. It is so creepy and insidious. And again, everybody's like, well, I don't really care because it drives me crazy.
Mike, our good friend Junk Bond, former NSA, was telling us that there used to be a CIA program called Life Log. And when the government ended that program 2 months later, guess what was created?
I'm going to guess there's a private company.
Facebook.
Ah.
So all the information that the government was collecting in Life Log, all of a sudden everyone was voluntarily giving to the government with Facebook.
All of us participating in Facebook have created a dossier on ourselves more comprehensive and more thorough than anything the government could come up with on its own. And you mentioned also, Mike, the use of government funds and enticing the states and municipalities to spy upon us. Reconcile that with the Supreme Court's holding on anti-commandeering.
Well, they don't have to do it, and that's what's enraging about it. And we're starting to see in some localities some pushback on this stuff. Interestingly, California, horrible on a lot of stuff, pretty good on pushing back against surveillance. The city of San Francisco just passed a bill, kind of a first step in some ways, but it at least requires local government approval before any police department in San Francisco, any government agency, can acquire any type of surveillance equipment. So they have to go public, say, we're getting X, Y, and Z. This is how much it's going to cost. This is how we're going to use the data. This is how the data is going to be stored and protected. This is the pros and cons, and then there'll be a vote. So at least there's some oversight and transparency there. But the real cool thing about it is that the city of San Francisco completely banned facial recognition technology. So government agencies cannot use facial recognition in San Francisco. So any locality could do this. Any state could do this. But unfortunately, law enforcement lobbies are so strong. They love these toys. They want to keep it secret. They want to spy on us. They will tell you that if they can't spy on everything you do, then pedophiles are going to run loose, or terrorists or whatever. And so your privacy gets eroded away and eroded away and eroded away. And, again, well, that's part of the battle that the 10th Amendment Center is fighting. We're working at the state and local level to try to push more of these things. We're enduring lawsuits and trying to at least put some fingers in these holes that are in the dike. But the momentum right now is certainly for surveillance, and I guess people are going to have to recognize. We're going to have to see some big group of people get surveilled and find out about it before people will get outraged.
Well, and, you can tie in this hex wave and the Geowarrants together. Again, if they're following you, they know who you are. I mean, this metadata can tell everything about you. Let's say, again, going back to the medical marijuana card stuff, and they can tell now what these Geowarrants, and if they're doing a search and they find out a certain person's in an area, wait, look, here's a gun range, and this person went to said gun range. Wait, don't they have a medical marijuana card?
Mm-hmm.
I see a federal law being violated here. In fact, I see a couple of them being violated. This person had nothing to do with our original search, and the crime we were solving. But folks, this is going to happen to you. And not only that, we are embracing this spy technology. We're being bribed to do it. Either from comfort, there's a mattress that can actually detect what you're doing at night and adjust your mattress accordingly. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? We have insurance companies bribing you to drive well by installing their app.
Yep.
So you can get a discount and rewarded for driving safely. Do you think that information might get somewhere else?
It might. I'll
And
tell
Suzanne,
you.
we were just talking about that TAPS bill where they're going to have a precog deciding, oh, you're a danger. You might commit a crime in the future.
I saw that. I'll tell you a quick story, and we can kind of wrap it up with this, of how this can actually affect innocent people. I mean, some people are going to say, well, if you're using medical marijuana, then maybe you shouldn't have a gun, or, there's people always have an excuse. But I'll give you an example that there's no way that anybody can justify this. This happened out in Kansas, true story. The police department set up a license plate reader in front of a store that sold like grow lights and things that you could use to set up an indoor marijuana grow. Okay. So one night, this guy is sitting in his house, wife and kids, minding their own business. Bang on the door busts down. In comes the armed SWAT team, everybody on the floor, kids terrorized, wife screaming and crying, guy trying to figure out what in the hell's going on. The police, they get him in handcuffs, get everything under control, search the house, and you know what they found? They found his tomatoes. Yes, the guy was growing tomatoes. Now, the reason he got on the radar is because
he have a license to grow tomatoes. First of all, before you go off the rails, Mike, and blame the cops, did he have a license to grow tomatoes?
I don't think you have to have a license in Kansas. No. So how did he get on their radar? Well, he went to this store to buy grow lights because he was growing the tomatoes in his basement. So obviously, if you're buying grow lights, I mean, you must be growing marijuana, right? So they made assumptions based on his location using this surveillance technology and ended up terrorizing him. His wife actually had some PTSD issues because of the police come barging into their home. So this is how things can be misconstrued, and you can get caught up even if you're completely innocent of ever doing anything wrong. And much less people who are kind of living on the edge of things that you and I might not consider wrong, but the state in its infinite wisdom has decided should be illegal and that you should be locked in a cage. This stuff is serious and people need to take it serious. We do value privacy, even when we say we don't. The example of people not giving their internet browsing history, the very fact that we have curtains on our windows tells us that we value privacy. And if we're not careful, it's going to be completely gone.
And, interestingly, as we wrap up the show, by the way, Mike Maharrey from the 10th Amendment Center, MikeMaharrey.com. You can follow him there as well. Godarchy, Thoughts from Maharrey's Head podcast. Outstanding content all the time. You are consistently good. And I thank you. I'm so honored you joined us on the show today. Mike Lee, senator out here from Utah, was talking about the need for the federal government to provide student loans or student assistance for criminals in jail that are incarcerated, because he said even violent criminals get out. So what he just did was acknowledge that they are putting nonviolent people in cages. Let
Mhm.
that sink in, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Cerberus Radio Network. I want to thank you for listening on behalf of the rest of us here. God bless you.